The left's war on Christianity is accelerating more and more with each passing year. We see it reflected in the data. Those self-identifying as Christian continue to decline, and religious service attendance has never been lower. This is having a disastrous negative impact on our society at large. We also cannot ignore the correlation between rising depression and detachment with the decline in religiosity. These go hand in hand. But we can't say the left is really against religion in general. In fact, they love some religion. They're simply rejecting Judeo-Christian beliefs while promoting their own politically motivated church of wokeism. This nation was founded by individuals of strong religious conviction, and their values and tenets are evident across our governing institutions. This is a good thing. We ought to protect it. To discuss this and much more, I'm happy to be joined by the First TV contributor, author Billy Hallowell, also a friend of mine for as long as I have actually been in media now, which is going on a decade, Billy. We are getting up there, my friend. So let's talk about this. Yes, good to see you. Well, let's talk about why is Christianity declining? I mean, we got Pew Research here that shows a smaller share of adults identify as Christian, while the religious nuns identifying as no religion is going up and up and up. What's happening here, Billy?
Well, I mean, listen, if you look at all the things that conservatives and Christians have complained about for years, the media, Hollywood, universities, all these complaints, they've kind of gone on deaf ears. But the reason we've been complaining about it is because those arenas outside of churches, that's where you learn. And so in culture, when the left dominates all of those arenas, cancels people, removes people, doesn't allow other ideas in, you end up actually having a situation where millennials and then Gen Z are growing up entirely. And by the way, a lot of these people, their families aren't going to church because of these dynamics, outside of the church, not getting any influence that really would give them a worldview that would actually uphold faith in any way. So it's that dominance in those three arenas that we've seen perpetuated and increasing that has really led to this, I think, issue that we face. And it's actually a crisis, really.
Speak also, if you would, Billy, to the religious gap that's generational. Again, Pew Research shows that these younger generations, folks that are Gen Z, millennials, they are far less likely to be religious than their older peers. What's happening here?
So younger people are always less religious, but what's happening, and a lot of times people on the conservative side will say, oh yeah, people, they'll just become more religious later on. That's not happening. What's happening is there's generational replacement, which basically means millennials and Gen Z who have been conditioned to almost be, I'm going to say anti-Christian, but what I mean by that is there's no Christian or even faith worldview at all because they're not presented with it. They are essentially given this sort of religion of the self. And we see this a lot on the left, actually. I mean, the left has been doing this for a long time. It's all about me, the self, policies that reflect that. Well, now that's infested Hollywood. It's infested media. All we really see, and we're inundated, these young people, we're on our phones, all of us, and we're taking in these messages all the time. And again, those original complaints of, oh man, they don't reflect my values in Hollywood and in media. At first, that was sort of annoying. Now it's actually shaped entire generations of people. And not only that, it's going to shape the generations. I've got an 8 and a 5-year-old, right? So my generation is going to raise another generation of people even more detached from that. So again, it's a crisis that's actually manifesting itself in some really bad statistics that we're seeing around the country right now.
One of the big restrictions on liberty, and I've been saying for many months now, unconstitutional ones, has been the prohibition that we've seen on religious services because of COVID-19. Are we concerned at this point, Billy? Should we be concerned that may result in an even more rapid decline? Essentially, that when people are cut off from their religious communities, are there people already arguing or already starting to see the early data that they may not go back for some time, if ever?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and it's going to take some time to tell because there's been a huge resurgence of online, right? So a lot of people are going to church online, but listen, people were meant to be in communities, right? And let's not forget, when we talk about this church issue, we get sort of consumed with the, I want to go to church. It's about me going, which is great. But what about the fact that churches provide food, resources? I mean, there are literally churches that the only food some families get is going to the church to get that food, or services, or rehab, all sorts of different services we don't think of very often that churches are providing. And so there's a lot going on here. When you're allowing a strip club or a restaurant or something else to be an essential service, and you're not allowing a church to do that, there are some real problems there. But listen, we've got a lot on the horizon here. There are already murmurings that some on the left are trying to push Biden to go after the accreditation of Christian colleges, right? Which would be a disaster. And so this is a much deeper issue, because all of that bias that's been going on in those three arenas, it's really impacted the way we think about faith. And a lot of people see no use for it. Meanwhile, we're watching suicide rates, especially during COVID, opioid addiction. These things are skyrocketing right now.
What can you tell us about the data, the science, if you will, on how faith helps overall when we're talking about things like depression, sense of community? Obviously, substance abuse and mental health issues are very closely tied together. How do faith communities, or unfortunately the decline in faith communities in terms of aggregate numbers, how does it affect that? How does it play out?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because when you look at Gen Z and you look at the statistics, so those are the youngest people right now, and millennials, they're the most depressed, disconnected, unhappy people on the face of the earth, the most medicated. I mean, what we're doing is we're all isolated. How many times, and you're probably guilty of this too, you go to a restaurant and you're with a group of people and everybody's on their phone. I mean, we have been sort of conditioned to be separate. When you go to a church, when you're part of that community, you're in person, you're connected to other people, right? So even if you're an atheist and you think about this, okay, going to church connects me with community. If I fall into addiction, if I fall into hard times, you have a built-in community of people there who are going to help you. They're going to help guide you through that. And so when you take those connections away, and then when you take away, I know a lot of people on the left love to talk about churches shouldn't be tax exempt. I mean, this is a whole other debate. What are churches doing for communities? They're, again, providing services directly to people that are in those communities and that are attending. So all of this, really, churches closing is not a good thing. Churches not being allowed to be open is not a good thing. And we're seeing, again, in general, before COVID, before all of this craziness, we were seeing a suicide rate that was through the roof, and we were seeing addiction rates that were through the roof. And so we've got to get back to having community. And also beyond that, what do churches offer? From a Christian sense, a connection to something higher, something bigger than us. It's not the government. It's God. It's being accountable, which is a good thing for people to be accountable.
Now, there's a lot of wokeism in church. There are Marxist Catholics running around. I can speak from my own faith tradition, who are all about the social justice, government action, and they'll support that. They won't call out politicians who are pro-abortion so much as they'll call out that they want, amnesty for illegal aliens and so on. But wokeism is also now in the church in the form of the transgender movement. Here is, this film on HBO that everyone's been talking about, Billy. Here's a clip from it where you have a child coming out to a congregation as trans. Play it.
Good morning. Today we choose to recognize, honor, love, and celebrate anyone here who would claim their identity publicly as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, intersex, pansexual, asexual, or any category that I've left out.
Billy, what does any of that have to do with faith traditions?
Well, nothing. And so it's interesting because it's this toxic misunderstanding of love, right? And I guess there's two things that we're called. If you're a Christian, you're sort of called to these two things, right? To truth and to love. And there's this obsession in some of these woke churches with love. And love's a great thing. But when we talk about truth and love, you need to be making sure you're standing by truth. Because if you're not standing by truth, you're not loving people. And so what you see in that clip, and they go on in that clip to actually bring the kid, I think the kid's 4 years old, on stage to say that I'm a girl, and that I'm basically transitioning, this little kid, and the parents sort of coaching them. This is completely out of line. When we talk about identity, from a faith perspective, your identity is in God. It's in a higher power. It's not in yourself. Again, this is the obsession with the self. And this is what we're seeing infest churches. There are lots of things that we might want to do in life that aren't good for us, right? And part of having truth and love is telling people that. But I think with children, this crosses a line, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it. And yet here we are now watching this in documentaries and seeing this play out and be normalized. And I think we're at a point where people can no longer not talk about it, especially in churches.
Billy Hallowell, good to see you, my friend. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Team Buck, just want to say thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more great content from The First, please click that subscribe button.